Hey, welcome back to the Brennan page. I'm Dwayne Page.
And I'm Kyle Brennan. Today we have a special guest in Sean O'Neill, who, disclaimer, is my mental performance coach. Sean is the owner of One Mental Performance, where he works with elite professional athletes from Team USA, professional baseball players, coaches, college athletes, and anyone else competing at the highest level. Beyond sports, Sean is a high school science teacher and a leader in critical thinking. He brings a progressive approach to education and performance. In addition to his work in mental performance, he has an impressive athletic background, having completed multiple marathons and competed in professional cycling. He also has experience as a high school baseball head coach, giving him a deep understanding of the mental side of the game from both an athlete's and a coach's perspective. So, as I mentioned, Sean's been my mental performance coach for the past year and a bit, and honestly, calling him my mental performance coach is a little bit misleading because when the two of us talk, it ends up being, okay, where am I at with my career? What's coming up? What decisions am I making? Uh, am I preparing for a certain type of role? Am I having a difficult time with a certain player? And we're strategizing on uh, how to best help him. And so I was really excited that today, especially towards the back end of it, we got to have that conversation that I ended up having with Sean uh, on a monthly, weekly basis. So that was exciting.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people and athletes think about mental performance coaches, there is a sort of tone or mood set to it. And I think having this kind of a conversation and an opportunity to do it in a podcast form is a good opportunity for us and the listeners to see that that's, first of all, a stigma that's not necessarily true. It's something that is being encouraged a lot more in athletics, which I'm very happy about. And it was a wonderful conversation, whether it was talking about the formation of his love for sports in general. I like talking about his journey into baseball, and then kind of how that evolved into what he does now. And as I expressed to him towards the end of the podcast, it's very good to know there's somebody like him caring for and working with athletes around the world.
Yeah, you guys are going to enjoy this one. Thanks for listening.
Let's go.
Do you have officially got a name now?
The Brennan page.
Okay.
Yep.
Which you have to tell the story of that because that's pretty damn funny.
Guess we should do that now. Um, so uh, the thing that's cool about it is you hear the Brennan page and you think it's Brennan's page. My name's Kyle Brennan,
hmm
and that's the page. And then you realize that Dwayne's last name is Page, so it's really just the two of us. And it's a cool metaphor because, and I think, Dwayne, I think I've said this to you in the past on the Behind the Mask calls, or I explained these leadership calls that we used to do um, to players is you're coming because you want, me and my title is the assumption, just because, put the ego aside here, but yeah, that's what that's probably what you're showing up for. And then you realize that Dwayne's the reason you want to stay.
give me give me too much credit.
I said that's the way I explained it to Robbie, who's a player that the three of us have worked with in different regards. And I said to his dad, I was like, you guys went on that call because I told you you should, and you trust me. I was like, Dwayne's the reason you like it. Um, so yeah, it's the
Gotta
Gets the
have
Brennan
a good
people
page.
opening
going.
act.
Gets the people going.
Yep. So
The
oh, it's been good.
motivation to
Yeah,
come in, and then Dwayne is the commitment.
hmm
Makes us stay.
we got a cool visual. You'll see it once we're done, because uh, by the time people are listening to this, obviously the podcast is up, but later this afternoon we'll have it posted and all that officially. Our logo is like a combination of a baseball field in the middle of like a Viking battle with like a space element going on, and uh, just a lot of
Hitting all
things that
the
we think are
genres.
cool. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. I
Baseball,
mean that's
Viking leadership.
that's the that's the overall theme too. And for me, when I talk about goals for life, I imagine and I'm trying to manifest this um, experience where when I own my own home and I'm some sort of establishment happens professionally where there's some comfort and stability. I want to be that kind of place where friends and family meet up and have that, sort of Viking longhouse experience where they're, you know, talking about their travels, talking about their adventures, talking about their ideas, because I really enjoy those moments. And I think I'm like 6 or 7 years removed from college baseball, and there's nothing I enjoy more than that 1 or 2 or 3 times a year where I see some former teammates or happen to cross paths with them on the baseball field, which is I guess the proxy battlefield of today's age when we're going on the baseball field and you share a quick story or you share a couple laughs or a handshake or something, and that's where the idea for the Viking mixed with the baseball and space is just because I don't know, I love sci-fi shit. I'm a nerd, so you know so it was that is what influenced the logo heavily, and I've shared that with Kyle a lot. But to me, there's nothing better than just shooting the shit with your old buddies and talking about ideas and your travels and adventures and those kinds of things. I love that stuff.
Now, it's funny because I was just talking to a client about this and how much I loved competing against my friend.
Hmm.
Like, it was never a comparison issue. It was like whenever I had like a teammate on like school ball, but then I'd play him in the summer, and it was just so much more fun. And I played so much better because there was this there was this known, like, all right, I know who this person is, but there was like, all right, they know me too. So they're gonna use all the little tricks they know about me. I'm gonna use all the little tricks I know about them, and it kind of leveled us up. And that's something that I miss about baseball. Like that was one of the cool things about those relationships and how they got you to a bigger goal along the way.
So, Sean, what was your youth experience like? Um,
I
we've
was a
talked.
soccer
Yeah.
yeah, I was a soccer player. Both my parents are from Ireland, so baseball was not in existence whatsoever for me. And then growing up in my neighborhood, a lot of kids played baseball. So I actually had no desire to play baseball until I got into middle school and I went to the meeting and the tryouts because all my friends were trying out. And I was like, I'm gonna have nothing to do if they all play baseball and I don't. So I borrowed a glove and they asked me like what position you trying out for, and I was like, I don't really know. And they're like, all right, go to the outfield. And that's how it all started. My first team was my middle school team. And then from there it was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is fun. And then I got fell in love with it. We had growing up the baseball bunch and this week in baseball. It wasn't like it is now where they can watch 40 games and they don't. For me, it was there's 1 or 2 games on a week and you made your time to watch those games and learn from those games. You know, and then I played in high school and a little bit in college. And when I became a teacher, I started volunteer coaching, and then that led to being a varsity coach and then college volunteer and all of those things. But the history of the game was something that I think drew me in. But then all of those things that you get from baseball, the relationships, like I was looking at a picture the other day of my wedding party. Those were all my teammates. Like those were at different levels from junior high, high school, college. They were all teammates of mine. And then as a coach, you see how you have this responsibility to teach a game the right way and then help your athletes grow as people. And that was really, that was the fun part of it. Um, I can watch and sit and watch games now with clients in them, and I can do it with just pure enjoyment. There isn't the competitive bone for me with that anymore, but it was just, it's just such a pure, good game for everything in your life.
When you said you fell in love with baseball,
Hmm.
like it sounds like your friends drew you in, but what about the game itself, coming from soccer, just not being too involved in it? What was that like?
I think I like the team aspect, but what you have with soccer, but then the one-on-one pitcher versus hitter. That was like, if you're a good soccer player, you have good teammates. But at some point in baseball, you have to be on your own. And that was exciting for me. Um, and then you have that ultimate question: would you rather be the worst player on a great team or the best player on a bad team? And I'd say we've all been both of those. And that that's that was a cool opportunity for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that individual slash team dynamic for baseball, being that one-on-one type experience when we talk about a pitcher versus a hitter, or somebody hitting a ground ball or fly ball, and then it includes the fielder, and it kind of becomes this sort of crescendo when your balls starting to move around the field and things to that extent. Um, what I've always found is that momentum and the, I guess, energy, how it can influence from player to player too. How we've talked about hitting being contagious, and positivity being contagious, negativity being contagious. It's interesting to see how like a team's dynamic can also influence the individual in their particular moment, whether it's them standing in the batter's box or being out in the field too.
Yeah, it's those moments are it's it's why I don't understand how people find baseball boring.
Hmm. Do you
I
think that
think if
comes from like a lack of knowledge for the game, or
absolutely.
yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember sitting at a game at Arizona State with my brother who knew nothing about baseball, and we were sitting behind home plate, and we started having this conversation about calling pitches. And he was surprised that I was able to call pitches and what the guy was going to throw and how guys were moving. And once he started to see that there was this very much flow, and yes, some things are predetermined, but then there's this preparation for all these other options that could happen. He started to appreciate the game a little bit more. So I think if you just look at a zoom out of baseball, it could be kind of boring. But when you zoom in and kind of see how all these different things could happen, that's when it you get pulled in by it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's what keeps people like ourselves involved with the game too, because when you understand the depth that goes behind every small decision, and I mean, listen, we're really just scratching the surface saying these kinds of things because there is so much involved. But that's really where the love starts to sprout. Something I'm curious about because you talked about getting into like I'm just kind of curious what it is that helped you identify playing, because you mentioned playing the game the right way. What exactly does that mean to you, and what does that look like to you? How did you learn that?
It's that we over me. Like yes, I have to be individually successful, I guess, to kind of motivate myself, but there is a bigger part. Like one, you could be the best player on your team, you're not going to win. Like if it's just you, you can go 4 for 4 and, but you can't do everything. And you have to rely on your teammates. But then that leads into the dynamic of we have to push our teammates. They have to push me to, to raise up our levels, which was, which I think is what you need in life. It's, you need those people around you, these conversations that we have. You talked about the conversation in the dugouts till it gets dark. Those are the conversations where we're making each other better. And that's such a huge part of this game.
It's a it's a collective effort of individual battles,
Hmm.
um, which is cool because you can be as someone who tends if you're someone who tends to gravitate towards more individual sports, like okay, this is me, I'm working a certain thing, like you can get that in baseball, but then you also have the team dynamic, um, and especially in like a pitcher catcher scenario, you're playing, uh, you're the one who's catching, you're throwing it, you're calling pitches, the whole thing, like it's focused on you, and then you go and hit, but then you have to work with someone else who's also doing their own individual thing. Um, same thing with middle infield and outfield. Like you have to make a certain play, but then you have to have a communication with uh, your teammates on where to throw it and this and that. So it's I haven't thought of it like that, but it's interesting that you bring up the interplay between both.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also there's that what's it called? There's the trust factor too, that you can focus on doing your job. I think about this in a defensive standpoint where you can focus on your job because you know your shortstop's going to back you up, or the right fielder. If you're playing third base, you feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that there's going to be backup behind first base in the event that there's some errant throw or something to that extent. It can kind of take the pressure off you knowing somebody could pick you up, or you say you have a good first baseman that picks the ball well. Okay, I can miss low because my first baseman's going to dig it out if he needs to.
Yeah. And that's that synergy of the game. It's, and that's also the cool part of the unknown. Like you talk about first base when the ball gets past him, you have the right fielder. But then as a middle infielder, you're like, all right, ball's hit to first base. This is what I do. And then all of a sudden there's a bad hop and it kicks off somewhere. And now the jazz starts. And it's, I can't just go to one spot. I have to be able to react to all these different other scenarios that pop up. Um, you look at that famous Derek Jeter play against Oakland with the missed cutoff throw and the backflip and all of those things. Um, that's like when people say that baseball is boring and it's not thinking. It's like, oh, that's just because you don't understand. Like this is a cool dance that's going on, um, and we have to adjust to everything that happens on the field.
You're bringing me back to the middle school, high school, and even college days where you're at practice, and it was always my favorite part of practice was when we would do some sort of situational defense thing.
Yeah.
Whether it be, ball in the gap, what are we doing, or a certain catcher pop up, or a bunt play, or a ground ball, and who's going where. As a catcher, I could see that the outfielders got bored of running around, like, I just got to go chase this ball and throw it in. Or the shortstops, like, okay, enough of these. Let me go run over here and play cutoff for the 11th time. Because you're doing a lot physically, but as a catcher, I didn't get bored of that even one bit. That's my favorite part of baseball is just that dynamic, um, which I think is so forgotten at this point.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. Even at the college level, I'm being the catching coach over at St. Joe's, we're doing something to that extent. Like we're doing like a team defense, a situational defense, and I'm reminding the catchers to have some sort of internal clock. Like, hey, the ball was hitting the gap. This is taking too long to develop. Let's change the cut, right? Like, say it's a man on second base, and the play is supposed to go to the plate, but now the play is taking too long. We need to change that cut. And it's interesting to see sometimes you need to remind guys of that. Meanwhile, you know, I'm not saying that me specifically, but I felt as though when I was playing at practice that catchers would often have that internal clock a little bit better. And yeah, sometimes we don't have the base runners out there for them to visually see it, but I think you guys sort of understand what I mean, that internal clock and saying to yourself, this play is taking too long to develop, or a play at the plate coming up and cutting the ball off instead of just letting the ball come in and blocking it. Having those layers of thought, which Caputo spoke about a good amount the other day, having those layers of thought really aids you when you get over to the game, and it needs to be sort of practiced in that situational defense there too.
Yeah, and it's funny when you see the chaos of what a base runner who slips leads to. Like making that turn at first, and all of a sudden they wipe out, and there might be a play at the plate, but all of a sudden there's chaos, and there's how do you solve that problem? Um, and that's I think players nowadays don't necessarily solve problems or come up with solutions. They're just kind of I stand here, I turn, I throw.
Is there, in your opinion, what are some of the things that have led to us getting to this point? Because, I find that there is some accountability to be had in a couple areas, whether it's player, parent, individual, like guardian, coach. Like, where is it that you see our shortcomings are in getting to that point?
Lack of free play. Like I'm on a street right now where we would play street ball every day, and all of those things came up. Like,
Yeah.
the ball hit the telephone pole and went the other way, and how do you handle that as a base runner? And where there was more chaos, it was more wild. I think now in the era of just private lessons and indoor facility and just taking ground balls, there isn't that chaos factor to it, um, which then makes you creative. Like how do I solve this problem? You know, um, I'm amazed at Little League where it's like kids will field a ground ball and they just know to throw it to first, even though like literally the base runner's right next to them and they could tag them and get a double play. They've just been conditioned to throw it to first. They've never had to problem solve.
I'm thinking about uh, kind of zoom out for a second. The way I describe you to people is that you are this uh, like silhouette, super high performer, genius, impressive guy that's just walking around Long Island in a sweatshirt that's hanging around some high school, like a high school practice, and in a couple years that you're already working with some very impressive athletes, and I think more so than the accolades of the athletes you're working with, it's that these types of people, once they spend time around you, they're gravitating towards you. Um, but then what's interesting to me is going back to you in that like middle school, high school realm. Um, your perspective of things was that, do you think that was different than some other people? Because your perspective on the world is much different than most people now.
Yeah, because I wasn't physically talented. Like like I became a good base runner because I was slow. Like I had to follow and figure out things like um, reading pitchers' moves or reading the ball coming out of a pitcher's hand and anticipating that it's going to be in the dirt, or trying to steal a catcher's signs. Like those were all things that I had to do. I had to go to the cerebral part of the game because I wasn't physically talented. Um, and you learn how to do things a little bit different. Um, like as an infielder, I played very shallow because I wasn't too quick. So it was like if I wasn't going to make that play, you know, being all the way deep, it's not going to make a difference. So it
Yeah.
was I got to get to it first and then make the play. And I think that helped me in all aspects of my life. Like, all right, I understand my shortcomings and what do I have to do to not make them shortcomings? Um, and the thinking part of it is huge. Um, like I'm sure we've all had teammates that were so physically gifted that they didn't really have to think about anything, but that wasn't me. And I think that's carried over to my life in general. I can outwork people. Like when you say all those nice things and I appreciate it, I'm not that guy. Like I'm not that smart. I just read a lot and I think a lot and I ask questions a lot and I have these conversations with you guys so I can learn from you. So when I am at a field and talking with someone, I can translate it to their language. Um, One of the more interesting things I see is when I'm working with those elite level performers who are just so physically talented, to get them to understand the mental part of it, they're like, "Oh no, I just do that," and it's interesting. It's a challenge because eventually they're going to get to the point where they just can't do that anymore, and I have to make sure they're prepared for it. So yeah, that's I think that's part of it. It's just the constant trying to learn.
With those, uh, with those guys where the game, whatever the game is, comes easy to them, and they don't have to think through things, and there's not a lot of mental strain on them yet, because their talent just supersedes those who they're around. Um, what are ways that you start to open their eyes to that sort of thing, and how do you learned how to learn and seek information and think about the game differently because you had to, but how do you
Hmm.
curate that in someone who doesn't need to just yet?
Start small. You send them little clips. You send them a text message with a question. Um, you ask them like so an athlete super successful, and you ask them the one question of what's one play you'd like to get back, and they're so used to being like, all right, my numbers are so high and I was the player of the game. What do you mean? What's the one play I'd like to get back? And then they start to become thinking about it. Like, oh, all right, yeah, there was that one play. Um, and then with other athletes, you don't want them to think about the one play that they they didn't make. You want them to focus on all the positive things that they did. So you really have to get an understanding of each individual and meet them where they are and kind of approach it from it's brand new. Each athlete I work with is brand new. I have a system, but that system usually varies real quick based on the athlete, the sport, um, their situation, what their goals are. Um, yeah, and that goes back to that idea of baseball, like that problem solving. You know, it's not just like a video game where ball goes here, next thing happens. It's ball goes here. All right, that got all messed up. How do we solve it? So yeah, it's very very interesting with all of our athletes and how different they are. Um, One of the things that has really shocked me is the difference in perspectives of male and female athletes. Like male athletes don't necessarily give a crap what other people think as much. Female athletes will not perform on purpose just to not upset a teammate, which is very, very bizarre to me, but it's been important for me to learn.
Something I want to uh, ask you about that we've talked about a little bit, but it's um, want to bring it up again. Something you do better than anyone I've been around is you ask really good questions.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point earlier, that's not something you just don't have. That's not a gift of yours. That's something you've learned. Um, can you talk about that?
There's, I've been very fortunate to, in mental performance, it's a community where the vast majority of the people are super altruistic and just want to help other people. So I've been fortunate enough to have guys that are in the major league sports levels just answer questions. Um, and one of them, by the name of Tyler Pasick, he actually co-wrote a book called Ask More, Tell Less. And it was it was eye-opening. Like we have a tendency to tell our athletes what they should be doing, as opposed to asking them what they see and what they're thinking and what their approach would be and how would they solve this problem. Um, because in telling them, we kind of take away some of their ownership and control of the situation. Where in asking them, we're encouraging them to take control of the situation. And when they have that autonomy, they generally care more as opposed to, oh, coach told me to do this. So, um, yeah, Tyler's book by far, I think, is a must read for all coaches. Um, and then it also takes away our judgment because a lot of times we will talk to our athletes with, like, especially if they make a mistake, like, why the hell did you do that? And there's this judgment that we may not necessarily want to come across, but there's a judgment there. And the athlete feels judged, and then there's a whole spiral. So when we just ask them, instead of why, walk me through what you saw. And all of a sudden, they might catch themselves going, oh, I could have done this. And that's been powerful. Um, because you help people figure their own stuff out, which then builds a power for them. We've talked about the term anti-fragile. Like, I want people to be able to solve their own problems. The the best thing that I could do is put myself out of business. that's kind of my goal someday is to be like every one of my athletes no longer needs me. They just check in, say hello, we chat, we'll have those conversations in the dugouts till it's dark, but they don't they don't need me, which I have had. And it's at first they're like, oh crap. But then it's like, oh no, this is good. This is what we want. And usually those athletes are the ones who spread the word the most. So it kind of just continues.
That's such a fascinating way of putting it that you're trying to put yourself out of business. I like that a lot. Um, I often times with my travel teams talk about like, hey, I want us to be at a certain point where me and Coach Mark don't have to show up and you guys are fine and you could play through an entire tournament without us. So I think you saying that describes that whole concept perfectly. The fact that you want people to have a little bit more ownership over what they do. You can see in players their change in approach when the ownership is there. And to your point, when you're saying, well, why the hell did you do that? That's really sometimes the only time that these kids are asked questions. And it can become sort of a negative experience to think for yourself. You know, it could probably cause, I would assume, some anxiety in making their own decisions. Meanwhile, if that creativity is there, whether it's established early on or if it's brought to a player in a positive way, I could imagine that that you know it gets to a point where they're thinking things and coming up with scenarios that we can't even come up with ourselves because we're not playing in the game. We're not seeing exactly what it is that they're seeing, and I think that is where some of the more fantastic plays and fantastic feats in our game and in any sport really happen is when they have that level of creativity.
Yeah, and that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we are a curious species, and if you're ever around little kids, it's 8 million questions. And being a teacher, this is where we screw up, is because we say that phrase, okay, stop asking questions. And all of a sudden they become passive. They become passive in their learning experience. They, they've been indirectly taught that curiosity is not something good. Um, so even in my classroom, the first thing we do is start asking questions. We ask questions, and they're not comfortable with it at all. They're just not because they've had years of not asking questions, but now they start to ask questions a little bit more. Um, and as
Sean,
coaches,
can you describe that environment? Because I think most people listening have no idea what that's like in a high school classroom setting.
um, so in a typical high school, it's we ask teachers ask questions. There's usually silence, and wait. We back?
All right, cool.
We see
Yeah,
you.
Yeah,
Oh, you're back.
my phone was dying, so I had to turn my car on.
Oh,
Um, this app uses juice quick. So going back in
so you started to say that
element,
in a high school setting, the
yeah,
teacher will ask. That's the last thing we heard.
okay. So teachers will ask questions, and usually there's a very awkward pause, and none of the students answer, and then the teacher just gives them the answer, and that's us telling them knowledge as opposed to trying to get them to earn their knowledge and work at their knowledge. So by asking questions, by getting students to ask questions, we're poking at their curiosity, which has been dormant for quite a while. So once we start poking at that curiosity, then they start to see that their questions are being answered and they're gaining the knowledge by initiating the questions. They take a little bit more ownership. And I think as players and as coaches, we can do this a lot where, you give your players a scenario.
All right. So sorry for that. So you started the transition into let's assume that that all recorded and worked. So
Yeah.
you
So,
started to say that as coaches and
yeah. So as coaches, we need to put our players in a situation where they're comfortable enough to ask questions. Um, it's it's easy to do in defensive situations, especially like team defenses, where you can give them the scenario. Like, okay, we got runners first and third. Now what? And just see what they can come up with. Um, this is for the Northeast coaches. This is something that you can do indoors, really, really easy. Um, you have some sort of board. Um, it could even be you give us you you show a diamond with base runners and just go, all right, let's come up with everybody come up with 3 questions about this. And you're hoping they're going to ask questions like how many outs are there? What are the base runners like? But that in itself, if they don't ask those questions, is going to lead to teachable moments for you. Because if nobody asks how many outs there are, there's a gap in their problem solving because you need that information. If they don't ask about, are the base runners, what's their speed like? Okay. That's important information that they need to ask. Um, as a middle infielder, I was always communicating both directions where it would be like, okay, if the ball is hitting the hole between short and third with a runner on second, what are we doing? Um, because sometimes if he was hit far enough in the hole, making that throw to first is probably not a good idea. So maybe I can backpick the guy at third. So I would always have that communication with my third baseman as to, in case of this could happen. And I think players need to solve those problems in practice, before they come up in the game. We see so many athletes bobble a ground ball and then rush the throw and where they could have had a better idea. Like, here's the scenario, you bobble the ball. So the asking the questions offensively, like all right, you're in the hole. Come up with 3 questions that you have right now. You're on deck. Come up with 3 different questions. By the time you're in the box, there should be no more questions. But that thinking through the process ahead of time, and that's what we call developing your routine. It all ties in together. It's just, are we curious about it or are we controlled by it?
that can be kind of a maybe not scary, but I could see why coaches would be apprehensive to do that because when there's
Mm-hmm.
this pressure of we're not hitting well and guys need to work and is this guy going to throw strikes or is we need people that are fast enough to steal bases and we want to work on those physical things. Um, it's very easy to be like, okay, we're gonna go over first and thirds. I'm gonna tell them what the play is. We're gonna do it twice. We'll run through it and then move on to the next thing. To then sit down and be like, hey, third baseman, what questions do you have about this? And then wait for them to ask something from a short-term time allocation that could seem like you're not really accomplishing much. Um, but I think on the back end, what you would learn from where the player's at and what they would ultimately get from starting to ask their own questions and develop their own process for it, I think the return would be so much higher if you're willing to make that initial investment.
Yeah, and I always when I talk to coaches and they're like, I know the mental side of the game is so important, but we just don't have time for it. And I go, all right, if I could get your players to have more focused energy and attention, what would that do to your practices? And a lot of them say it would kind of shorten the practice. like if everybody's 100% locked in, you'd get more done.
Hmm.
So I'm like, if you're willing to take just a couple of minutes before, we can dial them in a lot more. And then your practices become more efficient.
Yeah.
Um, would you rather do 10 kind of sloppy reps of first and third defense, or would you rather have two or three 100% energy, 100% attention focused reps?
I feel like that's an interesting idea because then it can open the door for players to talk about and bring to light what they feel the team needs to work on in practice. Oftentimes, I think a mistake that we can make as coaches is thinking that we know what's best for the team all the time. And the fact is, sometimes we don't know. We're not standing on the field. We might not be aware of somebody not knowing their backup assignment or a bunt rotation assignment. And sometimes when you just simply open the floor for players to take some sort of ownership over what we do in practice, they can shed light on some of the things they feel they may not be understanding, and we can attack that. Going into whether it's a travel baseball team going into a tournament or a college team saying, hey, listen, we as an offense are struggling with breaking balls. Like, let's get the hack attack out today and work on hitting breaking balls. And let's talk about the importance of approach with breaking balls and not swinging at these specific breaking balls and swinging at these specific breaking balls. That ownership is so key. Um, I wanted to talk about something in regards to building a routine because I recently had an experience with this. Actually, last night with some of the youth guys, they're doing some live at bats, and I talked with my catchers about building a pre-game routine, something that they don't do.
Mm.
Whether and what I try to, I set some parameters for them. I say I would like you to have every movement involved. Well, first it's kind of a, what do you think we should do? And then they want to say things like work on something that is very specific. And then I say, well, listen, we got 10 minutes to do this. Let's like this is how much time you're having before you need to get with your starting pitcher and then get him ready to get in the game. What is it you need to do? And then we run through the whole thing, and then I'll kind of stop them at certain points or say something like, hey, listen, it's been 8 minutes. You've only done receiving. Like, we need to do some blocking, we need to do some footwork, those kinds of things. And something that I noticed was like they got stressed out.
Hmm.
Like we're sitting in practice inside, and they were like getting stressed out over this because they all of a sudden have a timestamp on it. They need to get this XYZ done, and all of a sudden they were stressed out about it. It was so interesting to watch.
Yeah, the it's interesting when you ask players about their routine, they'll talk about like, well, I put my lucky socks on and and then it goes from there and it's like, okay, but what do you do to prepare yourself for the um the mental part of the game? And it's, I don't know. It's like, okay, so let's look at it. What and each athlete's going to be different. Um, Routines are very personal, but you mentioned a couple of things where you're like, all right, you said, what do you guys want to do? So then they have to prioritize. And in making them prioritize, they're using up valuable energy because they're trying to think about things and what does all of this, there's a lot of stuff going on. We have limited amount of energy.
So we want to use our routines to make us more efficient in our games. So for depending on the position, I'll always ask them start with a question. What's your three most important things? What are the three most important things you need to get done in order for you to be prepared to play? And that's where they start taking ownership from it. It's like, all right, it's this, it's this, it's this. Okay, let's do it. And sometimes you'll have an hour to get ready, and other times it'll be the bus has been late, you got stuck in traffic, we have 8 minutes before we have to take infield. We can't do our 25-minute routine. So what do? And that brings stress too. So let's have a long-term routine. Let's have a short-term routine. And let's see what are the most important things. That's the key. Like, what are your three most important things? For some guys, it's blocking and receiving. For other guys, it's going to be footwork and receiving. It's, all right, what do you need to get it? And they have to practice that, and they have to explore that. And that's where that curiosity comes in. Like, all right, guys, let's do this routine this day, see how it goes for you. All right, for you it went well, for you it didn't go well. What would you like to change? So then they can each get the routines that they need to perform better.
I found that after doing that, we were able to talk and sort of bounce ideas and criticize each other's pregame routines in a way that's what I wanted the players to kind of do that. So I had three, 12, 13, and 14-year-old catchers. And I was like, okay, what did you like about his routine? What did you like about his? Is there anything you would change? Those kinds of things.
Now, the
But I
one
should.
thing I would do is change the word like,
Okay.
because then we're judging.
Yes.
What did you learn from his routine?
Got it.
And
That's
there
that
might be
is
something you learned that you didn't like, but we're not judging. We're just learning.
got it. And in what they found was that it was easy for them to then prioritize. And I said, if we were to do this again, what would be your routine? And they were much clearer with what they felt like they had to do. And I talked about, okay, like next time we're going to get the stopwatch out and we're going to try to do a 10-minute routine and see how it goes up until that point. But it was cool to watch. And then what I wanted to tell them, and I told them this at the end, was, you know, why I like having the routine because I do it with my college catchers, and their routines are very different. The two starting guys we had last year, was I felt that it helped them focus. I felt that it helped them feel confident, and I felt that it helped them just feel physically prepared for the game. And I reminded the young guys, listen, you don't want to be panting and exhausted after these routines too, because one of them looked like he was exhausted. I was like, dude, you're about to play a game. You don't want to be this tired right before you go out there, you know?
Yeah, and that's teaching them how to be efficient with their energy and attention. And you do it in a way where we talk about, like, if your brain is kind of like a bank, we want to make deposits. We don't want to make withdrawals. We don't want to keep withdrawing. So in practicing those routines, you're making deposits. So when it's time, all right, you know, I did my routine. I still got $100 left in the bank. I'm ready to go. As opposed to, you said that one kid was like exhausted, because he was overthinking and doing all these things. He had like $1.25 left in the tank.
Yeah.
it wouldn't be ready to go. So that's all part of their learning experience. There's different routines for home games and away games, just because of time. Pitchers have a real big issue with this, where home games, especially college pitchers, because they're like, all right, I can do everything. I can get to the school early. I can get there an hour before my teammates and do all this stuff. And then they get to an away game and it's like, oh no, I can't do that. And then they feel rushed. They feel unprepared. They're not ready. And it usually, for those college pitchers, that's where you see like the first inning is a disaster and then they settle in. I have one of my athletes now and he very much goes through that on away games. And I'm like, all right, let's throw your first inning in the bullpen. So his warm up on away games, mentally, he's in the first inning while he's in the pen. And he's just working. He needed that primer to, I need the at-bats. I need the at-bats. I need the at-bats. So for each person, it's different. Some guys, I kind of encourage them to take about 3 minutes to sit and just mentally go through their highlight room, think of the 5 best times they've ever played, because that boosts their confidence. And then let's visualize what we're going to do today. And that takes 3 to 5 minutes. That's on away games. I tell them to do that on the bus. So when you get off the bus and your feet hit the ground, you're already in there.
This is reminding me of when we had the previous episode. Pat Cantwell was going through his story, and one of the things he was big on that we talked about later in the episode was him, or just professional players or athletes in general, having a very, Dwayne, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to say strict routine or like way about their day, but they had a very methodical way about their day. Now, not to say that we talked about the balance between these guys being like checking every box.
Superstitious.
Well, what I was getting at is guys would have, okay, like they're super prepared. That's what I'm getting at. They're doing all their homework. They're doing the physical preparation, the mental, like they're doing everything. But then they also have times throughout the day where they're deliberately not focused on something, and just going through the whole uh, progression of it. So as you're talking about, creating that those types of things with, in this case, sounds like a college player, where the ones that really succeed, where they just improve a lot, when they're on the bus, they have a purpose to what they're doing. Now that might be joking around and seeming like they're not even concerned about a game, and for the other guy, it's reading something. One guy heads off the bus and he's listening to music and he's just trying to keep it light, and you have another guy who's locked in and he's already thinking about the first pitch he's going to make in 2 hours. So that there's a developmental process to that, and it sounds like that's something that you work on with your athletes, especially if they're in the latter stages.
Yeah, that's something that each individual does on their own. You could, even with on the field, there are different levels of precision. So like pitchers have to be much more precise than the right fielder. So the right fielder's warm up and routine might be a little bit more bouncing around and hyping everybody up, where the pitcher may be more locked in or focused on mechanical things. And each person is different. That's what, like, it's interesting, like locker rooms. The traditional locker room, loud music blasting and all of that stuff. But for some athletes, that's too much arousal. They're bouncing around in the locker room, and then they get to the game and they're exhausted. So for each individual, we have to kind of find what's work. Um, One of my volleyball players, her locker room was very much, they're all dancing and stuff, and that was not conducive for her to get better, and to play well. And she started with the headphones, and then she felt that when she put the headphones on, it made her teammates think that she wanted to be separated from them, and that kind of caused bad feelings. Um, so what she actually did is she worked it out with the trainer, where the trainer came in one day and was like, all right, I'm going to stretch you before the game. Didn't, but she was actually in the trainer's room just sitting in the comm and visualizing what she was going to do. Went out, performed really well. Her teammates for the entire season thought that was her routine. Like, she was getting stretched and it was a physical thing. But for her, it was actually just a mental thing to get her primed. But she didn't want to insult her teammates.
Yeah. Dude, that's so cool. That whole concept is so cool. How like, because I'm you're describing this to me, and I'm going back in my head of the locker room environment that I've experienced, and I'm like, was that even good for me? Like, I couldn't even tell you honestly, because I'm like, I'm trying to draw connections to performance and that kind of environment. And I think that's fascinating. That's something that you talk about and deal with. So my question is kind of, how is it that a player can identify this environment's good for me pregame versus I need to find something else? Because it seems like, number one, there's a couple different ways to be, and number two, it's how is it exactly that you discover what's productive for you, what's good for you, what helps you get ready?
So you build awareness. You actually ask questions about it. So what I'll do is give my athletes kind of a sheet, um, and it has an arousal curve. Like, if your arousal is a 7, that's where you perform best. And what they do is they actually, a lot of times in the fall for baseball players, they'll do this where they'll manipulate their arousal before practice. Like, one time they'll be at like an 8, like bouncing off the walls and all of that stuff. And they purposely mark down, like, I was 8 or 9 today. And then they reflect at the end of practice, how did they perform? Were they in a good headspace? Was their energy level good? Did they get tired? Um, and then they dial it back and they go, all right, this week I'm going to be a 3. And they do a 3 and see, like, when I'm warming up in that 3 mode, how do I perform? And they're gauging. They're going back and forth. They're kind of experimenting on their own. And then the ones that really become good at it can realize when they're in pregame, do they need to amp it a bit or do they need to dial it down? And we teach them strategies of, all right, if you need to dial it down, we're going to do a little bit of box breathing. If you need to amp it up, do some sprints. And they experiment. It's purely they become curious. There's that questioning again. They become curious as to what works best for me. And it doesn't take too long to figure it out once you become consciously aware of it.
Yeah. Because again, as somebody who might just be viewing the game, whether it's a college game or a pro game or even a high school baseball game, you're watching guys do a lot of different things. And so many times, the example I'll use is you're watching players go out in the left or right field line and run some sprints, and sometimes the idea that you might have watching that is this guy's physically just getting ready to run. He's making sure he's, physically capable of running. Maybe he's trying to work on his first step, trying to steal a base. Maybe he's making sure that he can turn effectively. Those are the kinds of things that I think can come to mind. I don't think many people are thinking this guy's trying to get himself a little bit more amped up for his pregame. You know what I'm saying? Like that stuff is so fascinating to me, and I appreciate you shedding a lot of light on those concepts because, dude, I as a player, it's something that I don't think I thought very much about.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a tendency to put more to like what walk-up song do we have or what songs are playing pregame. And we need this music to hype us up a little bit and that's all part of it.
Mm-hmm.
We just generally don't think about like I actually have control over whether I'm up here or whether I'm down here, depending on what works best for me.
Well, Dwayne, we've had
And
this conversation a lot where I was very aware of myself getting ready for a game. It would be a well drawn out warm up of mobility stuff and this and that just to get ready physically. Because once I checked all those boxes, more than anything, and I knew this at the time, mentally I was ready to go. It's like if I did all those things physically, then all I had to do was just go and play, and I could focus on the team and the game and the pitcher and whatnot. But what I'm getting at is, Dwayne, we've talked about this where I think your focus was more so on your teammates and people around you. So I'm curious, Sean, for like how you see that fitting in, because Dwayne is very much worried about the team and how everyone else is doing and his boys and the whole thing. So
that's understanding your role. If your contribution to the team's success is that, making sure all your teammates are in the right spot, great. That's your role. That's like utility infielder. We need those guys. But if the team's success is more reliant on your performance on the field, then you also have to be a little bit more self-aware. I'm not going to say selfish, but you need to be, for my team to do well, this is what I have to do. And in order to play well, this is what I need to do. So
Yeah. I felt especially in particular responsible for the starting pitcher. Me being a catcher through college, I definitely felt a sense of responsibility and connection to the starting pitcher. And what I did a good job of was sort of gauging, the guys that wanted you along on their pregame routine, and some guys obviously needing some more space and some time where they're kind of by themselves. I guess those are certain things that I did recognize at the time of being a player. And as a coach, you see that guys just have their different routines. Um, Definitely posing these kinds of questions because it's something that I know because I've seen firsthand, whether it was as a player or now as a coach, the impact of a good routine for certain players. It's something you really can't you really can't replace. And I know this might sound silly, Sean. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Ted Lasso, where they have you seen that show?
I have not, but everybody tells me about
I've been
Dude.
telling him to watch it for the last
You got to
year.
watch that show. That show's fantastic. But they have what is it? They have they have a therapist come in and start talking to the team, and you start to see the coach you see a lot of it from his perspective, and he starts to, no free ads for Ted Lasso. Sorry, I love that show, but he starts to see his players, their mindsets totally shift, and he starts to get like a little jealous because he doesn't have a hand in this new process for some of these guys, And I'm not going to spoil it, but it's cool to see how their whole mentality shifts, and it translates on the field and stuff. And it's powerful stuff, and I'm so glad to see and hear from people like yourself that this is something that's being talked about and practiced more openly and widely throughout athletics.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're in mental performance. So our ultimate goal is to get our athletes performing in a pure way, a consistent way, not side of peaks and valleys. And then a lot of times we get grouped in with mental health. And it's like, whoa, that's a little bit different. Like, yes, one creeps into the other, but you're not going to come to me if you're having issues with depression. I'm going to send you to someone else who's way more qualified in that than I am. So the Ted Lasso shows, which are I've seen a lot of clips from it, so it's definitely very, very good stuff. But you talked about the coach kind of getting jealous because he's losing some of his control. And I know one of the my coworker has the sign on from Ted Lasso, and it's be curious, not judgmental. And that goes back to those questions. You know, we just want to be curious. What routine works best for you? How how can I help you get to where you're performing on a more consistent level? Um, you know, what do you think works best for you? Um, a lot of times we don't ask that, like, because we're a team. We're all doing the same things, and it's like, well, if the goal of the team is to win, maybe a few of us need to do things a little bit differently in our warm up in order to put us in the best position to be successful. And that's always a fun kind of argument. And I prefer to work with individuals because a lot of times when I work with teams, there's a lack of congruence with me where I'm like, all right, you need to work on your individual routine and what works for you. And then the coach is like, everyone, let's do this. And I have those conversations with coaches, and sometimes coaches have told me, like, just skip that. It's like, oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
This is not the diner and you're ordering, gravy and fries. Like
Yeah.
it's I want to give them as many tools as I can to help them as individuals perform well to support the team success. But then there's you have to be in agreement with the organization. And I think that's one of the tough things, and Kyle and I have talked about this with professional sports, where do these support staff people actually fit in? Is it shut up and do what we say, or we're bringing you in here because you're an expert? Can we, give you a little bit of flexibility? And that's hard. A lot of Major League Baseball mental performance coaches don't stay with organizations too long because they kind of feel handcuffed about it. And it's still one of those, like, well, the physical coach is more important, the strength coach is more important, the trainer is more important, the taping guy is more important, the mental performance person, you pop in if we need you.
Do you
Yeah.
think that's something that that maybe they don't see, or they haven't been exposed to these types of, whether it's conversations, or because especially being a coach that does not have exposure to these types of conversations or has not experienced this, it's like, well, I know if this guy, squats for this amount of weeks or this amount of time, his legs are going to get stronger, and maybe he'll throw harder. I'm just using some sort of blanket example, but if I have a mental performance coach work with my team, I don't, do you think that it's just because they don't see what the hard translation is or what that looks like necessarily?
Yeah, it's not as easily measurable.
Hmm.
It's not a number on a wall. Um, but I think coaches are such an integral part of this. Um, there's so for some of my clients that are at Division I schools, they have a sports psychologist, and this has happened, I'd say, to 90% of my athletes. The coaches go, "We have a sports psychologist. They're going to come in." They come in, the coaches leave. And then there's the conversation. Anything that you guys say to us is completely confidential. It will not go back to the coaches, which is understandable for like HIPAA and stuff like that. And that's the mental health part of it. But then there's the mental performance part of it that the coaches are not getting cued on. And the coaches don't know how they can use it in practice. And then it's like, well, then what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
why are we doing this if because a mental performance coach isn't going to be there every day. So the coaching staff needs to be in those meetings. Um, I had one athlete, their coach brought in the mental performance coach for the Olympic team in their sport. This person, very high level, went through things, taught the athletes strategies. The coaches all left. The coaches had no idea what the strategies were. Next day in practice, all of that was thrown away, just gone,
I'm
because
sorry,
there was
just
no
really quickly,
reinforcement.
do the coaches leave because they have to or because they feel like they have to?
So I I don't have access to the coaches. I know in for one of my athletes, they said because of HIPAA regulations, but that's because they were focusing on mental health, not mental performance. But I would say for a mental performance coach, you have to have the coaches in there. Like you,
I th- I think
and
in the
if
pro side, um, I don't know other sports, but in baseball, a lot of times the types of mental performance, mental health people that they're looking to hire are qualified in both. So then they
Mhm.
get blurred, which is a good thing in a sense because if uh, it kind of two birds with one stone sort of a thing. Like, hey, so and so's having a tough time with maintaining a good emotional state and focus during the at bat. Okay, that's mental performance. That same player is having a really tough time. His mom's sick and he misses home and he's been really anxious. Talk to the same guy, wonderful. But then now, when the coach wants to talk to them about like, hey, he's really up and down, and like sometimes I can't engage him. Like, what do I do? Then
Mhm.
that professional is saying, well, in the back of their head, they know, okay, well, this is going on at home. I can't share that. So then they're like, yeah, we're working through some things right now. And the coach goes, oh, okay, and then like respectfully understands, not to pry.
Mhm.
And then sort of to what you said earlier, where like where does that uh, type of coach professional fit in? It's not. Sometimes it'll be scheduled where okay, 30 minutes with so and so, or today, the team's talking about this. But it's one of your other points, like that's not really how this goes. You can give strategies. Hey, sleep's important. Hey, it's really important that we have a plan. This is why routine is important. But then the player walks away going, okay, routines are important. I need to sleep. And like there's that individual. Um, so it seems like no one really knows how to interwork all of it.
Yeah, it's organizationally. Kyle, we talked about that one mental performance coach that been there for a year and a half and the GM didn't know who they were. it's it's where you have to, I think as the field grows, there has to be better conversations. Um, and I think it is easier to probably do on the college level. And hopefully if it's done well on the college level, it takes care of itself on the professional level. But the the ones that I know that have sports psychologists, the biggest argument I hear is they know psychology, they don't know sports. Like the athletes were like, they cannot speak my language. And they don't want to learn the language because they're a psychologist. So I think as the field grows, there will be a better working dynamic and the field will evolve to where, high schools are doing it now. Like I know one school district on Long Island has a mental performance coach, full time, gets full coaching salaries, works with every team, and that school does really, really well in athletics, and it's a good thing. Out west, definitely have it a lot more. On the high school level, we're in the Northeast, we're culturally not necessarily the ones that are thinking too much about thinking.
Oh, what do you mean? The forget about it people don't, they're not talking about these kinds of things?
Sean, I think
you know,
assuming that the mental performance coach or whatever the title is competent and gets what, is a good person to be around players and all that sort of thing. I really think the onus is on the coach. When the coach is curious and wants to learn and build that relationship with that person, maybe not on a personal level, because this is your colleague, it's not um, like not your therapist kind of a thing. But when there's that trust, like, hey, how do you think we can do this? And you start to get that perspective, and it's me to the mental performance coach is good, and I'm working on my relationship to the player, then a whole unity forms.
yeah,
But until you have a coach that, and I think most coaches recognize it's important because I think most coaches have dealt with the mental side of the game themselves, and a lot of times it comes across messaging the players, but um, their willingness to involve the mental performance, mental skills side of it is still very wary, and I think that's where the growth needs to come from.
agreed. Yeah, I've been kind of fortunate to work with some baseball coaches and I speak their language. But if you ask me to go to like a fencing team, I would learn as much as I could about fencing. There's that curiosity again. A lot of people will go in and just do their spiel as opposed to learning. It's kind of like when you're coaching, you have a system, but it has to change according to your athletes. You're playing with the athletes that you have, not the athletes that you wish you had. So if you have, like, your baseball offense is based on, hitting 4 home runs a game, and you don't have a guy that can hit a home run in your starting lineup, it doesn't work. So it's just a matter of finding where the needs are and meeting the athletes and the coaches, um, what they need, and then adjusting accordingly.
It sounds similar to strategies that you take with your players and coaches take with their players, that the mental performance coach and the sports coach need to have that kind of rapport and trust built like Kyle started to talk about, and because again the wheels are just turning right now, because I feel like in our setting right now with us three, we see the benefit of it, and we know that it is super important for our game and for athletics in general. But that relationship and that sort of bridge needs to be formed instead of barriers between the coach, the athletics coach, and the mental performance coaches.
I
Yeah.
think also
And
it comes down to, uh, well, not comes down to, but um, people's understanding of what mental performance is can be very different. So, like when I was in like high school, college range, so 10-ish years ago, um, my perception of mental performance, which I wasn't doing anything about it, was like, hey, let's talk about our feelings and that sort of thing. And then I realized I'm like, oh, that's not really what it is. And I wasn't judging that, but like, okay, that's not what it is. And then I thought it was a rah rah, like I'm gonna jump up and tell everyone I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best, and then I was gonna believe it, and then I was gonna go up there and I was gonna hit 400 because I said I would, and I was like, this is full of shit. So,
That
and it's
didn't
neither of
work.
those.
That didn't work, Kyle. Oh my God.
It can be portrayed that way. People that can get popular on the internet and whatnot. Um, but it's not what it is. It's just strategies to compete well, to focus on the right things, to um, worry about what matters, to be curious. Like those, it, it's coaching. It's already existing, and what we're doing is just people that are, frankly, just better at working with
like
players on it.
I always tell athletes, because 90% of the people that come to me come with something wrong in their mind. And I go, I can't fix anything. Like that I do not have the skill set to fix what you have or whatever problem you think exists. Um, I can give you strategies to help you work through it, but I don't fix things. Because honestly, you're playing a game. So like there's I'm not, surgically repairing an elbow. That's a fix. Okay. I'm just gonna give you some strategies, ask you some questions, get you to reflect and become more aware, and then from there it'll translate into your performance. Um, and then the the rah rah motivational speaker. Um, yeah, they get all the likes and all the attention and all of that stuff, but motivation is just the start. It's, can you be committed? That really is the where your development comes from. So yeah, I would love if I could just wave a magic wand and fix everything, but that's that's not me. I
That's what
can't do
hitting
that
lessons
for
are
you.
for.
Yeah, hitting lessons is the
Exactly.
magical
Hitting
fairy
lessons are
dust.
good for that. Yep.
Hitting lessons, pitching lessons, absolutely.
Oh man, Sean, let's take a break. I'm gonna it's that time where go to
Bathroom.
the bathroom. Yep. And then
You
we'll
lasted
we'll keep
longer
going.
than usual.
Well, I was locked in, man.
And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drive home because Cablevision's done with my house, and I'm gonna log in from my computer.
Oh, we got a dual episode here.
Let's go.
Okay, sweet. All right.
Goes to the blooper reel.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about that actually.
Yeah.
Making one.
Blooper reel?
The hardest part, we so I mean sometimes we have bloopers where it's like, oh, Sean's internet, or Sean's gone, or the on the last call my brother decided um they were doing some electrical work and he was trying to turn the electric off to the kitchen so he could do one of the lights, and instead it was labeled weird, so he turned off my light. So we're on with Pat and Dwayne, and I'm sitting here and Pat's talking, and all of a sudden it's just dark. But my the Wi-Fi didn't go out, so the call stayed on, which was good. But you could suddenly, like, my lights blacked out, and you just saw the light from the screen on my face, and we were just like,
I was kind of holding my breath there for a second while Pat
and
was talking.
I know Pat kept talking, and then it came back on, and then these lights had to yeah, turn those back on. We just kind of like didn't talk about it. That's funny.
Yeah,
But no, the hardest part is, so once we're done with this,
the
we
intro.
will. Yeah, once we're done with this, we'll say, okay, goodbye, Sean. Dwayne and I will stay on, and I'm gonna read a little intro, like, this is who Sean is, and it's ends up being a minute and 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes long, and it takes us like 15 because it's like reading and yeah, sound make it sound good, and we have to like force a quick combo. It's uh,
It's
yeah,
fun. Honestly, it's very funny. That's where most of the bloopers will come from. It's like, nope, that
yeah.
was fucking dumb.
Yep, can't pronounce words, and I'm trying to read something on the screen and like make eye contact. It's a disaster. But yeah. So
Very
something.
like,
What'd you say?
very polished and organic.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
Talking for 3 hours, no problem. Talking for 3 minutes, difficult. uh, it's hard to trust someone that is good at talking in a soundbite. There, I said it. But
You guys are full of shit. We know it.
oh man.
Yeah,
So
too
so
polished.
yeah, too polished, no, no bueno. Um, so we kind of went off on a long tangent there, which was awesome. Um, and the themes that kept coming up, and I wrote it down, are just your curiosity, your desire to learn. Uh, you have a very like uh, exploration type perspective on the world.
Hold on.
We
You knew how I am with technology.
we're good. Um, so yeah, as I was saying, uh, common themes that uh, I think are pretty obvious for me when I think of you are your curiosity, desire to learn, and this perspective of exploring the world around you, whether that's relationships with people, your environment, but I think just what you could learn from your experiences. We were last talking about your baseball experience in high school and what that was like, and then that led us off on that conversation. I want to come back a little bit to your college days or post college days, whatever, or like early mid 20s, whatever you think is important. I'm interested in your experience then and your view of the world at that point and how that's shaping into who we know today.
Oh boy. I always tell my wife she wouldn't have liked me if she met me in my early 20s. Um, because I was teaching, but I was also quite immature and not necessarily comfortable in my own skin. Um, so the 20s I kind of just blow by. Um, where things started to come into really my personal development was 30. And that's when I finally had enough self-belief that I could be successful. Um, I was very much driven by being the underdog, but in reality, I realized that that was just my perspective. I don't necessarily think people are really the underdog that they think they are. Um, I think as Americans, we love the Rocky story and we try to put ourselves in that when in reality, we're just kind of blocking ourselves from exploring and learning and being authentic, being who we want to be. Um, so it wasn't until I got probably till my 30s, got married, started having kids when I realized that like I have to I got to have myself figured out if I'm going to be of any value to those around me. And that led to, some exploration, meditation, and mindfulness, and doing some big physical challenges like marathons and triathlons, and um, trying to challenge myself physically, but the added benefit was the mental side that came from it, where it wasn't just, physically you were doing something. It was the mental part of it became much more pronounced in my life. And then I would see that in my students. Like my students were just not resilient. And I wanted to figure out a way how I could translate that knowledge or wisdom, I guess you'd call it, into my students and my athletes. And that's where the whole mental performance journey really started to kick in. And, taking certifications with Brian Kane and working with Tyler Pazik and some of the other guys, where that's where my development really occurred. So I call this Sean version 2.0. And then in a couple of years, it'll be Sean version 3.0, and, hopefully getting better each time.
So I'm curious about that transition. Was it there's some moment where you say, I'm making a change, I'm viewing myself as someone different now, or was it more gradual? Um, was it, did you immediately use some of the physical things to help you uh, get out of this, or was it something you discovered along the way? Like, what's that transition like?
It was gradual. There was opportunities along the way that I, I was open to be aware to, where like when someone said, you know, you're doing a race and it hurts and it's painful, everyone there is feeling painful. So why am I slowing down and they're still going fast? Well, it was the relationship in my head with that pain, where early it was pain means stop, then it switched to pain means I'm really accomplishing something. And it was just reframing that mindset. Um, and then, doing research into like growth mindset and fixed mindsets and things like that, and how our perspective on things can really drive whether we see it as a threat or an opportunity. So it was definitely a gradual process. It has sped up. It definitely has sped up, but there wasn't like some defining moment in my life where I woke up and went, all right, now this is, this is the day. No, but it was just reframing how I saw the world, and even COVID, the pandemic, for me was a great opportunity to reframe how I saw things. Um, and I know most people wouldn't say that. And I had a lot of loss during that time, but it helped me get perspective, which was invaluable.
I feel like what you pointed out in American culture and the whole Rocky story, um, I feel like that is what sort of curates the idea that one day I'm going to wake up and make this complete 180 type of turn instead of this gradual, so uncomfortable shift in in essentially your thought process and your thought paradigms. Um, was there a recognition along that process for you where you started to see this shift and sort of reap the benefits for it? And how did that leach into other areas of your life?
Yeah, I think there's the building of the awareness, and then the also kind of realizing that I was holding myself back by not accepting being uncomfortable as part of life. Um, we want to be underdogs, but we want to be comfortable. And that's, they don't work together. They
Yeah,
really don't.
it's a dangerous
So
trap.
yeah, and kind of moving on from there, and that awareness and that forgiveness. Like, a lot of people, I think, ruminate on when they get awareness, like, oh man, I wasted this time. And it wasn't, no, I wasted this time. It was, I learned from this time. And I didn't ruminate in it. I didn't get stuck in it. A lot of people get stuck. They talk about, if I would have done this, or, I could have done this. And it's like, all right, you didn't. Move on. Let's make the next best decision. So I was fortunate enough that I didn't dwell. I kind of went, all right, I'm learning about myself. I'm getting better. I'm getting to be more authentic in who I want to be. Cool.
Tell us about the different physical things. I'm aware that you uh, did a couple marathons, but then even last time we spoke, you told me that you were racing with professional cyclists at one point. So we won't have that in the intro. So explain to us those sorts of things.
So they were I'm getting older. I can't play sports the way I want to, but I'm not going to play golf because I'm not going to play golf. So it was,
Come on,
let me
man.
find other physical things that I could do. And it started with, running the local 5K. And then, all right, I'll do a half marathon. Okay, I did a half marathon. I'll do a marathon. Okay. Um, the running is kind of boring. I like riding a bike. Maybe I'll do, duathlons. And then it was, well, I'm not a good swimmer, so let me try that. And through all of those, you meet new people. I was fortunate enough to meet and become friends with a professional cyclist who um, kind of showed me what elite athletes really are. And it's interesting because we talk about obsession, um, and he would say obsession is probably the worst thing because it took over his life. It ruined his marriage. He wound up, you know, being part of the whole Lance Armstrong scandal and getting suspended and all of those things. Um, so it was an obsession. It was it became a passion for him. And he trained me. I ran the New York City Marathon with one run a week, where I just trained on a bike, which was definitely interesting. Um, did some very cool bike racing, um, like Whiteface Mountain, like racing up that, and that was the first time where I really experienced that, like, blackout vision during a race where you're actually performing better, but everything shuts down in your body. So all of those things
Cycling's
were
this crazy thing because the amount of pain you have to endure to get to a even like moderate heart rate
Mhm.
is just so asymmetric compared to something like running. Not to make running seem easier because it's not. I'd much rather ride a bike, but to get your heart rate into like a upper end of zone 2 or lower end of zone 3, like you're just jogging along, and you got to do it for a while, but you just kind of you're chilling. To get your heart rate to 150 for someone our age, like a zone 2, zone 3 on a bike, you have to be mildly suffering,
Mhm.
and that's the easy part of the race.
Yeah, but even that word suffering, the this was talking about framework and how you think. Um, people going through chemotherapy are suffering. We chose to get on a bike. We're not suffering, we're experiencing. We're experiencing our body go to a very uncomfortable spot, but we chose to do that. So, suffering is like kind of put upon you. This was just experiencing and framing it and understanding, like learning. We talk about level 1 and level 2 and zone 3 and zone 4 and shifting the gears on a bicycle for different terrains, is kind of a bigger metaphor for our lives. We're going to endure, we're going to experience, we're going to have pain, there's going to be uncomfortableness, but we can shift our gears and tolerate it better or make it worse. So sometimes we, misshift, but that's all part of the fun of the race. And in those races, you know, you're you're not going to win like that. And that was a reframing of competition for me. It wasn't like I'm gonna get a medal or I'm gonna like I remember running the marathon and my daughter was like 3 and she's like, did you win? And I was like, I finished, and she's like, oh, that's a little disappointing. I was like, no, not at all. Um, but that was all part of that mindset. I think if I would have dove into that in my early 20s, I probably wouldn't have gotten those lessons from it because I didn't have the framework to handle it mentally. It was either I win or I'm not good enough. Where now it's like, oh, I'm good enough because I did the best I possibly could with this, and that kind of frees you. I was having this conversation with an athlete about the difference between competing and comparing. Like, are you going to sit and compare yourself to other people on the field, or are you going to actually go out and do what you can do to the best of your ability? If you're comparing yourself to others, I didn't get 2 hits. They got 2 hits, or they're going to start over me. You're going to miss the fun of it. You're going to miss the joy of it. And that's something that's very much hardwired into us. Like, you have to compete to win. Well, no, I have to compete to get better. And sometimes I'll win and sometimes I won't. And that's okay.
I think going and using something again to compare it to a conversation we had earlier, it's hard to quantify that the effort and the preparation and the execution has a result. We're talking about baseball, whether that's going 0 for 4, 2 for 4, 3 for 4, versus understanding that you competed to the best of your ability, which that in itself is a win. So I think sometimes it's just hard to get into that frame of mind because it is hard to quantify. So what are some strategies that you would take in, I guess, teaching or helping somebody shift that thought process?
Number one, you have to understand what you can control and what you can't control. Like, winning and losing, we don't control that. We can play really to the awesome and lose. We've all had that. And it's kind of and then we've had moments where we've won. And just in the last Super Bowl, I think it was Antonio Brown was like, he had this whole post of like, I thought winning the Super Bowl was going to be it for me. And like, it was the most, and he's like, it was cool for about 2 minutes. And then I realized that I loved the competition and I loved everything else about it. Like, most of us on this call will not have a World Series in our lives, but I don't think any of us would say that our experiences with baseball were useless because we didn't win the World Series. So understanding what we can control, parents need to understand that a lot. Like, um, much like my daughter going, "Did you win the marathon?" When we're done, game's over, it should be, "Hey, did you have a good time? You know, what were some things that you did well?" The one that when I say to parents, they look at me like I have four heads. Ask your kid, name three things that their teammates did well. And then they realize like our conversations are always about winning or losing. And then your kid feels like a loser even though they did everything in their power. And then they associate winning with happiness and losing with unhappiness. And now, now you need a psychologist. You're never going to be happy if your happiness is purely based on winning. Um, just doesn't work that. So understanding what you can control and what you don't control, um, falling in love with your process, like realizing the discipline that you're learning from, you know, doing all those blocking drills. That uncomfortableness because you're going to take at least one off the elbow. Those are the things that, and you mentioned Pat Cantwell. That's probably the favorite kid I've ever had the opportunity to share a dugout with. You know, he loved everything about the game. The bumps, the bruises, he thoroughly enjoyed all of that. Um, so yeah, understanding your process, why you're here, all the benefits that you get from it. Um, we have the three of us have never shared a diamond, but we share the language and we share the love and we share the experiences that we've had and we can relate to each other about it. So there's a ton of value in that.
How do you think, as coaches or educators or uh, mentors, parents, do we, instead of like we have this conversation, and I think we agree upon that this is where kids need to have their focus, um, but I'm not sure that the environment that they're in incentivizes that.
Mm-hmm.
So, from people in our position, how do we better facilitate these types of things?
I think the first step, especially as a parent, is it's not about me. It's my kids doing their activities is not about me. Um, a lot of parents, whether they'll admit it or not, will see their kid make a mistake and think it's a reflection on them. Like, oh, Johnny made an error. I'm so embarrassed. Well, it ain't about you. And I don't think any of the other parents really go, wow, Johnny made an error. His parents must really not care for him because they would have gotten him extra lessons. Um, it's that shift. Like, let our kids experience it. Let them have fun. Let them have their experiences, not live through our experiences. Yes, we can use our experience to help them navigate it a little bit faster, but it's theirs, not ours. Um,
I think some parents that because I've in my coaching experience I've definitely had some parents that are not that have not been exposed to the process. Talking about baseball specifically, they haven't been exposed to the work, what's involved, the fact that you can do everything right and still lose, still fail. So sometimes I feel that there is that disconnect. So for for a parent that might not have that baseball kind of background or that baseball experience, what I'm getting from you is that there does need to be some patience and understanding and just accepting that it is not, like you said, a reflection of the parent.
Yeah. And I think that allows the kid to then enjoy their experience a little bit more. Like my kids were in gymnastics. I know nothing about gymnastics. Go flippy flippy, whatever you're doing. And it was just a matter of, you guys have fun. That's, that's it. Um, when it gets more competitive, the the stresses change, the pressure changes, but we can, as parents and as coaches and as adults, they need to realize that stress isn't a bad thing. It's how we perceive the stress that makes it good or bad. So we can teach them that at a young age. Um, I remember my first experience as a parent with youth sports was 5-year-old soccer. And my feelings was it, go out, run around, play in the grass, you're outside, have a great time. That was the whole approach to it. And there was a kid on our team who every time he scored a goal, his parents would yell, "We're going to Toys R Us." Like, so every time he scored a goal, he got a toy or a reward, and he was a ball hog and all of those things. They were missing the point as to what we do, um, what sports are. Um, I remember that same mother, a kid on the other team scored, and I cheered for the kid because it was a cool play. Like, and they're 5. Every kid should have every parent cheer for them when they're 5. And she came over and she was like, that was someone on the other team that scored. And I was like, yeah, it was awesome. He made a great play. Good for him. And she's like, I guess you just don't understand competitive sports.
Oh man.
Oh,
And I was
Karen.
like, well, and her husband knew me and he knew my experiences. And he was like, that's the dumbest thing you could have ever said. And I was like, that's no big deal. Like, you're right. I don't understand competitive 5-year-old sports because 5-year-old sports shouldn't be competitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not, no one signed contracts with, FC Barcelona or anything right now. So it's, there's only one athlete that I've ever experienced from a young age that I was like, holy crap, that kid's different. And that was Marcus Stroman. Like, at 8 years old, you were like, wow, that's different. But everybody else, like, and that also is, all of our careers end. We don't want to have our existence tied into something that's going to end, because then our existence ends. And now we got to figure the whole thing out again. Like, baseball's part of our journey. It has taught all of us wonderful lessons, but it ends. And if we're lucky, it ends when we want it to end. And if we're really lucky, then we get to go into coaching and spread that to the next generation. But it's gonna end. And we got to help kids realize that. Like, um, tryouts are coming up, and there is nothing worse than seeing a middle school kid sitting on the curb crying because they got cut from a team and they don't want to go home and tell their parents. Where it should be like, all right, you should feel comfortable enough to go home and tell your parents because they're going to be the ones that help you get through this, and hopefully it's not, well, I'm going to go get that coach fired because there are some that do that. Um, but yeah, those are all opportunities. Like, too many people think that sports is just reward. They see, $1 million contracts and think that that's why we do sports. I think all of us, if we were physically healthy enough, would play every day if we could. We like if I said to you guys right now, right, we're gonna go play a game of hit, pitch, and field, we'd be out there if we could, and that's because we enjoy the game.
I can't help but think with so many different life lessons that are taught, and sometimes indirectly through your experience in sport, and like you said, it ends that that transition afterwards can go a bunch of different ways. There are some that them as a competitor, as a teammate, and all that were excellent, and then they don't have the medium to do those things within, and then when they transition out, um, they're kind of lost. And I think we've all felt that way when we've um, transitioned out. Is where how can you apply some of those different experiences, the things you've learned, but then also how do you keep that curiosity, that learning, that struggling to get better at something, the camaraderie. I think that's just so important to find that somehow in something once you're done.
You got to be curious. You got to look for those opportunities, whether it's coaching or it's in another sport. You look at the rise of pickleball. You know, I think that is the perfect example where, all right, my athletic abilities are a bit down, but I can still go out and compete and I can still have that social interactions. Um, I think that's a really good example of it. Are there some that will live and die by pickleball? Probably, but I think most of the people that are playing it are like, I work a regular job, I got a family. This is an hour where I can stay in shape, have a good time, have some laughs. Golf, very much kind of the same ilk for you golfers. He's shaking his head. I haven't gotten there yet.
I never
You
thought I
guys may
would,
have to
man.
take me out.
I never thought I would. I used to poo-poo it a lot. My roommate got me into golf, and it's literally all I want to do. It stinks being in the winter right now.
I
You got to
almost got
move to
sucked in.
Florida.
I know. Kyle did. Kyle was getting out there a little bit.
I was, and then if you know what, if I had been around you uh, enough, where like the reason I wanted to go play, because I was like, all right, I'm gonna go hang out with Dwayne and probably Mark and whoever else for a couple hours, and that was more fun than not. So that's why I wanted to, and then it's fun. I'm not gonna, there's no denying it. It's an enjoyable thing. It's just that the time suck. And then when I was away from you guys and someone pulling me, and I had to go put forth that effort to get better and the time to go play and the whole thing, I was like, I don't want to prioritize this.
But you ventured it into other ways with your training and your lessons and your curiosity and your podcast and you're doing all of those same skills just in a different environment.
It's for me, it's not something that I was conscious of when I was transitioning from player to coach, because I've shared this before on the podcast, and like we might have talked about this a little bit. I don't remember who we talked about this with, but anyways, I it was a weird transition for me because I had started coaching while I was playing college baseball just over the summer, and then baseball ended, and I was like, well, I already started coaching, I'm just gonna keep doing that, and it was sort of a like a slow death in regards to my player experience, where I was just like, a couple seasons go by and it's like, holy shit, it's been 5 years since I took a not professional, but since I took a competitive at bat, and now it's been 7 or 8 years. You have a weird identity kind of shift. And what I try to, not in some abrasive way, is let guys know that I'm coaching that at some point this will end, and that's okay, because you see players, especially being a college coach, having experience as a varsity coach too, you see that sort of desperation come out in maybe the last season or last two seasons, which I can relate to heavily. My senior year was definitely met with some sort of anxious feelings of, oh my God, this is going to be it. And you let them know that, hey, it's okay, because these skills that you acquired are transferable and translatable, and you're also going to find that kind of passion for something else, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's learning. Like, we all go through school and we're writing all the time. We're writing creatively and we're writing, essays and stuff like that. And then you leave school and most people don't write anywhere near that anymore, but you still have that skill. And the skills in baseball, yeah, you could swing a bat. That's awesome. You know, that skill may not be super transferable, but the discipline that you learned to swing that bat, that transfers. That, like, the going to hit off the tee, not the most exciting thing, but you're going to go hit off the tee to discipline yourself enough to get good swings. That's going to transfer to the work world, where you're going to stay an extra 10 minutes to make sure that that email is right before you send it out. And that's why athletes are so marketable in the work world, is if they've developed those skills of discipline and communication and teamwork and effort and intensity when needed and resilience, you're like the perfect employee. Not necessarily did you win your conference championship. I'm sure there are some jobs where, you're hired because you won a conference championship. I mean, in some of those big Power Five schools, but most of the real world doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I think it just highlights the importance of having those adversities and figuring out what to do about it largely on your own as the athlete. So then that way you can then acquire those skills and earn those skills and experiences, um, versus someone giving you the answer, or you developing an unhealthy relationship with it, perhaps because of a parent or a coach or whatnot.
Yeah, and that's where the strategies of what I teach are so important. Like, one of my athletes, she finished her college career and she's in job interviews right now. And she's like, I use box breathing on my job interviews. And I'm like, perfect. Like, that's why we do these things. Um, you know, she's talked about going into job interviews and the red thoughts, like, what happens if I don't get this job? And being able to replace them with green thoughts, like, this is a great opportunity and I've worked hard for this, and all of those things. And and she's going to be a parent and her kids are going to play sports, but maybe she's going to be the parent that teaches all these mental performance strategies to her daughter's youth softball team. And then I'll be out of a job and it'll be okay.
Yeah, that's a it, that is it's comical the way you put it, but again, it's a warming and welcoming thought. The idea that the more these conversations are had, like with the athlete you just described, the more that community aspect comes into it too, which I've said this before. I try to land on the optimistic side of things, and it encourages me so much in my own practice. But and this is something Caputo says all the time, that when he starts to hear his words being repeated from the players in certain scenarios, he really feels so good about that because he feels as though messages are getting through. So it does make me feel optimistic when you paint that scenario, and that community and these conversations are really evolving and starting to grow into more things. And it makes me feel that really that our, because I feel baseball specifically, I'm sure you guys can agree, gets criticized for being in a weird spot, that it gets criticized for it wasn't the way it used to be, and this, that, the other thing. Like, things aren't supposed to remain the same. They're supposed to change. They're supposed to get better. And sometimes when it gets better, when it's improving, we might be on a little bit of a downtick or whatever it may be. But the I really like the scenario that you just brought up, that it makes me do feel really good about where we are, where we're at, and where we're headed.
Yeah, and you like to be optimistic. What gets your attention gets rewarded. So if you pay attention to all the positive things, you're going to have more of them. You're going to see it more. Like you said with Coach Caputo, like he loves hearing his guys repeat things that he said. You know, if he was focusing on all the negative things, he'd never hear that comment. And
Mm.
we biologically tend toward the negative because it protects us. But, we need to be reminded of that optimistic, that gratitude. Like, you know, I always tell people, like I have to go to practice. You get to go to practice. Like there are thousands of people that wish they could do what you're doing right now. You get to, and that just changes the way you think about it. Like, oh, this is actually something, like this is a reward as opposed to this is a chore.
Powerful thing. Um, when I first started to hear that, or as an example, that one, where I know I don't have to, I get to, or other cliches, it's easy to be, and it's kind of how I am by nature, to be skeptical of certain things. Like, oh, everyone's kind of chanting the same thing, and it's cool, and everyone's drinking the Kool-Aid, sort of a. But when you start to have that perspective shift, you start to view things like, oh, actually, I get to go walk on the uphill on the treadmill and do cardio for an hour instead of
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I gotta go do that. It's like, well, I've had that taken away from me here and there, and I'm glad I get to right now. Like the word "get" is more of a byproduct of how you're thinking about something. Um, where I don't know, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, whether or not you're going to start saying, "I get to do this, I get to do that," or um, picking the optimistic side and saying it, not necessarily believing it. But at some point, it shifts to where those sorts of things come out because of how you're perceiving everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've certainly experienced that shift after starting to spend time with you the last 12 months, 14, year and a little bit. Um, and I remember I was not skeptical of mental performance and not skeptical of you in particular because I didn't know you yet, but I had experienced people in your field that I don't think highly of. And I was like, oh, here's it. But I also knew that it could be really good because of like books I'd read or listening to podcasts like this with someone that is far enough along their career where I wouldn't be able to work with them for a reasonable uh, amount of money. But I knew it could be good. And yeah, at first, when you bring up these different phrases like what gets your attention gets rewarded, and you have to get to, or above the line, below the line at behaviors, it's kind of like, oh, it's regurgitating things. But I think what really sold me was when I, and you didn't say it to me, you didn't like sell it to me, but I realized that you had made these shifts consciously at some point in the past, and you were actively working on these things. You're like, oh yeah, I ran a couple marathons. I was like, this guy's not built like a marathon runner, which if you ran cross country your whole upbringing, and you were a track star, and then you did a marathon, like not to take away from that experience, but that's like me saying I hit a ball 400 feet. Like, okay, I played college baseball and I'm a large person. Congrats. Uh, but to, but to, for you to be 30, 40 pounds heavier than the other cyclists, and uh, they brought you on the team because you could bring yourself to a certain place that you learned to get to help them up on difficult climb and like things like that. I was like, oh, like this is a real, like this is real here. Um,
Well,
that.
mindset is much easier caught than taught. If you have to live this. Like, I can't sit there and go, you know, I need you to think about positive things, and then I'm continuously in a negative mindset. It doesn't work. It's phony. Um, you're not authentic. And this all was my journey that then I wanted to pass on. It wasn't something that I was like, oh, here's something I can make money off. And and you know how I am with, charging for this. So it's one of those. It's part of me. It is inherently part of me now. It is not something that I have to consciously think about. Like when we first started working together, I remember you saying, all right, no more PowerPoints. no,
Yep.
no PowerPoints. Let's just talk. And it was like, okay. And that was your curiosity, um, which was coming in. And I always talk to you guys about, I appreciate your vulnerability because you both realize that you can improve. And a lot of people think that they can't improve. They've gotten to a certain role where it's like, because of my title, I am great. And that's a very dangerous, it's a scary place for me. Is like, I see it in my profession where people measure their ability to teach based on the number of years they've done it. And it's like, well, does that mean like a 90-year-old is 9 times better than a 10-year-old as a human being just because they've been here longer? Not so much. So you have, it becomes part of you. It's your authentic self. That's why my 20s were a disaster, because I was trying to figure that out. But I don't regret that because I had to learn.
Yeah, you could also see it coming in someone else. The signs, and you also, if someone's headed down that type of path, whatever that path was, you you've walked it, so you know where they're at and how they could be reached better than someone that just had it all figured out, if that person existed.
They exist. I don't know if they figured it out, but in their cognitive dissonance, they've had it
Mhm.
all well put in there.
I like that you say it's part of me, because I think of the different mentors I have and people that I uh, really really admire as coaches, or really in anything. Um, there's a way about them where when they're talking to players or they're working with the people, like they're doing their thing, right? It's they, they're just being themselves.
Hmm.
And which sounds so simple, but they are sharing, they're interacting, they're bringing all of them to it, and the byproduct is, let me say it,
They're in flow. They're in personal flow. They're no longer judging themselves. Um, you guys are probably too young to remember Bill Batewell,
I know.
Sachem coach. That guy was, you talk to the people that know him, and he was just the most authentic, true to himself person, and it just overflowed when he coached. And like, kids will always be like, "Oh man, I loved playing for him," and it was because I don't want to. He didn't judge. He didn't judge himself as to Like, if I make this decision, what's going to happen? Who am I going to anger? It was, this is it. This is what you get. Now they would say, no F's given, but he just didn't judge himself. He didn't compare himself to others. He just was Coach Batewell. And if you're around coaches like that, it is so refreshing, and they make everyone around them better.
You can feel it. I've heard a lot of stories from coaches now who've been around the game for a while. They talk about Coach Batewell, and that's definitely the impression you get as a player and as a coach when you watch other coaches. Because again, I feel I'm in a state where I'm always learning from other people, whether it be players, coaches, parents, etc. You can sense the amount of genuine energy and authenticity that these people have when they're doing their thing. So it fortifies for me when I'm approaching a team or when I'm approaching a player, just to be my authentic self. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for me a big part of that is admitting when I don't know an answer, or letting people know that I am going to make mistakes, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want my players to know they can make mistakes. They are going to be wrong in certain situations, so to speak, and that's okay. So I know for me, a big thing, and I talk about this with Kyle a lot, is we jokingly say, like, we don't know anything. We're just
Mm-hmm.
we're just coach here. But when I let people, when that veil kind of comes back and players are aware that I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm aware of that I'm not some all-knowing being that was just plucked from the universe, and that I just exist and I know everything. It creates such a better relationship with players.
Yeah, and that's in mindfulness, they call that beginner's mind. Like, we approach everything with this newness. Like, we don't judge it. It's just, here it is. Um, and there are some coaches that, you know, little did we know they created the game of baseball.
Oh
Fine.
my God. I love those
Yeah.
expressions, dude. He was there when it was forged. He was with Abner
Yeah.
Doubleday.
Yeah, and those ones, they're interesting. They are definitely interesting. And I think everyone should play for at least one of those in their career.
They're not comfortable experiences, but
No.
they're that's not the whatever that experience was won't be the last one.
Yeah. It does. It definitely has an impact on your current state too. Meaning, if that's all you know, that can
Mm-hmm.
meaning if the only experience you've had as a player is that kind of a coach, I think it can definitely be a detriment. If you're coming from a place where you've had a coach that the experience was, you're experiencing a coach, we'll say, that has more of that beginner's mindset that you described, and then you go to another coach that was there and forged the game of baseball, thank God for them. Then they can kind of have sort of a comical approach to it, and again, I will never say to be disrespectful, but your experience is a little bit different depending on what
Mm-hmm.
you have had as a coach in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. It's always interesting because you can see, like, on Long Island, it's very common for, well, it used to be common. Someone would coach for 30 years, and then a former player of theirs would take over, and everything's the exact same. Like, there are certain programs that you can see it's 45 years of the exact same. And that used to be the blueprint. I think now you have a lot of coaches that are stepping away, and a lot of younger coaches are coming in, which I think is great. We're seeing the powerhouse schools that used to win everything are not the powerhouse schools anymore, and You have little upstart teams popping in, and it's like, all right, this is making it fun again,
Yeah,
and
which is
probably
I
for recruiting.
yeah, it definitely is. It's cool to see, and from my perspective, getting to closer to my 30s now, and I get to see younger coaches, guys that I mean, I feel old saying it, but I see guys that I've coached that are getting into coaching and having conversations with them, and just remembering that when I did coach them and I said to them things like, dude, one day I want to learn from you. And the look that they have on their face is like, dude, what are you talking about? But it's true. I mean it then, and I mean it now when I get back and I get to watch them do their thing now. It's so exciting because, it kind of feels like you speak that into existence. That you say to them at the time like, "Hey, I want to learn from you one day." That's just how it's going to go. Like I'm doing a catching clinic with a kid who's going to be a Division 1 baseball player, and he's looking at me like, because again, he's a respectful kid. I'm the coach in this scenario. I'm running the clinic, and I say to him like, dude, you're going to play at a higher level than I played at already. Number one.
Hmm.
So what makes you think that when you come back, you're at first year, I would imagine you're going to have things to come back and say, wow, we did this and this, and I feel like I'm always learning from my players. So when you have that full circle kind of moment where I'm standing there watching somebody that I coached now coach, it's such a cool experience.
And it goes from you having them ask you questions to now you're asking them questions, and it all goes back to that curiosity, like, and just the autonomy of your learning, which is just so much fun. I have some, I think right now I have 15 former students who teach in my building. They're my colleagues now. And I went to a conference and one of my former students was the keynote speaker. And I sat in the first row and I took out my pad and I was ready to go. And she goes, before we start, I just got to let you know that that's my high school bio teacher. And I think it's so cool that he's here to learn from me because I didn't think I can teach him anything. And she taught me a tremendous amount. So it's a different environment. You know, that Division 1 environment is different than a JUCO environment or a Division 3 environment. So you're going to learn new things. That's why those coaching clinics are so much fun if you actually go to learn and not just, go to Mohegan Sun.
So Sean, what are you up to nowadays? What's in 2025 was what is Sean O'Neill? What is One Mental Performance? Where are you headed?
So right now, um, many of my college athletes are starting their season. So there'll be a little bit of shift from the college players to high school players. Um, this was the first year where I actually had a group of high school players to work with that I'm very interested to see where their season takes them and their new approach. I have a couple of schools that want me to come in and work with their teams, um, which is going to be a new dynamic. We talked about that congruence, what works in my message with their coach's message. So that's going to be a fun learning experience. Couple of different schools, very different personalities with coaches. So that's going to be a good challenge for me and a good opportunity to, can I communicate to all those different types of people? Um, hit my goal of working with 200 athletes this year, um,
Wow.
which was fun. Things like catcher metrics and prime infield help with that a lot. So I'll be actually there prime infield this week and metrics Friday and Saturday. So I'll be at those. Um, I have some elite level athletes that are in season right now, but it's going to be taking them from college to professional. That's the next step, which is exciting. um, and how I can get them prepared for a level that I haven't experienced yet. So
I was
that's
just
gonna,
about to bring that up, where you have an ability to mentor and guide is not the right word, because like you said, it's not like you've made that transition to, get drafted in the second round and go play in double A somewhere. But you have a really strong ability in figuring out where they need to have their focus, what questions they need to ask, what's important. Um, can you kind of like, so what are your, maybe not with those athletes specifically, but in that type of a case, what's your thought process like working with them?
for me, it's research. So I'll go on Google Scholar and I'll type in um, mental challenges for elite athletes. And I will find research paper after research paper and research paper. And I will go through them and figure out what's applicable to that particular athlete or that situation that they're in. Fortunately, there's a lot more research coming out now, which makes it a little bit more easy. I'm not going in blind. Um, Speaking to people like you who are at that elite level and the challenges that your athletes face, those are all, I don't have to know what it's like to face a 95-mile-an-hour fastball painting the corner to understand how that can frustrate you.
Hmm.
And if I can give you the strategies to understand that frustration and get better from it, then we're going to be fine.
That's
You know,
interesting.
I'm
It's
not.
like breaking it down into components of what are the difficulties and what's the response to it, and then
Hmm.
focus there.
Yeah, because the challenges that, I just read a report about Olympic soccer players. They're the challenges that they face are going to be the same challenges that a lacrosse player or a volleyball player or a baseball player are going to face at that elite level. Um, you know how elite professional athletes all seem to group themselves together because they have those shared experiences. When we read the research about those shared experiences, that's why like the documentaries like the Formula One documentary or the um, swing golf documentaries on Netflix.
I love those. I watch all those
Yeah,
things. You
yeah,
get to
they
see
have a.
like how are they. You look through it through a different lens. When
Hmm.
someone's look at. I watched the basketball one. I watched a lot of these. The tennis one's phenomenal. I love Formula One, the sport, but the tennis one's probably my favorite in terms of how open they are about what they're going through mentally through it. But
Hmm.
I bring up the basketball one because I'm not a huge NBA fan or anything. I think it's crazy athletic and super impressive, but I'm not really a fan of it. I don't know half the guys that are on it before watching it, but when something happens, like, oh, he missed this shot, or oh, his girlfriend's upset with him, or he's away from his family, and I'm like, how are they? I'm like leaning in.
Hmm.
How are they responding here? Um, and to look at it through that lens, and then when they interview the coaches, sometimes I'm like just leaning in. So
Yeah, and they have those shared experiences, and through these documentaries, we get to share their experience. And like you said, it changes our perspective on it. Like the NBA one that's going on now, and they're talking about how LeBron James, it, his body is a temple, and how precise he is with it and everything that he does. Um, most normal people will never understand that level of commitment. And if you're going to the next level, you need to be aware of that commitment. Kyle and I, we've talked about professionalism and how some guys get to the minor leagues and they're not professional. They stay up and play video games till 1 o'clock in the morning when they should be sleeping and all of those things.
Yeah, it's the biggest hurdle, I
Yeah.
think.
So those programs, that phrase success leaves clues. If we're like, if I'm trying to help athletes get to that next level and I don't do that research, then I'm just kind of making crap up.
Yeah.
And that's not fair.
I listened to a podcast recently that described just success in general, and that especially in this day and age of technology, that there are many blueprints out there to kind of pivot off of your success leaves clues statement. And what is lacking a lot of the times is there are these blueprints for success, but there's not a plan and there's not action phases being taken place.
Yeah, that I have a goal to play in whatever. Okay, so what are you doing? We talk about reverse engineering your process. Like, all right, if that's your goal, what are the little steps that you're going to take every day to get to that goal? And then when you get them to do that, that's a huge step. But then they also have to realize, like, you can do everything right and still not get to that goal. So you better enjoy the process of doing everything right.
You might have to do it again and again
Yeah,
and then refine and do it again. And
yeah. And
I
that's,
guess that's why you said earlier the athlete, especially the athlete that performs at a high level, is definitely somebody that's sought after in the professional work environment too.
yeah, because all those factors we talked about, just, yeah, we, we see it with youth sports, and it's like, all right, I'm going to put them on this team because they're going to get a scholarship. And it's like, well, Clemson isn't at this tryout handing out scholarships right now. So you need to realize there's a whole process here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even the recruitment process, there's this misconception that like colleges are going to just knock down your door. Like,
Yeah.
we've never heard of you. It's you have to go out and make yourself known. And that's uncomfortable. You have to go to these tournaments and all those things, but that's all part of the process.
You might have to actually go down. I mean, I say this to a lot of kids in high schools. You might have to go down and actually go to these schools' camps if you want to play outside of your region.
Hmm.
Because again, they're not. Oh, we're gonna do some research on Long Island and Suffolk County and see who the best player is there, and then we're just gonna reach out to them. Like that's not how this shit works. Even the
Yeah,
really talented ones too. It doesn't work like that.
yeah. And then you have all those other factors. Like when they do recruit, they're not only asking your coaches. Like if they know someone in the area, they're going to be like, all right, so what have you heard about this kid?
Hmm.
Especially now with NIL and the transfer portal, the 17-year-old doofus who, is late to class every day and only shows up during their sports season. Am I going to invest $300,000 in you, or am I going to invest 80,000 in the 22-year-old transfer who I know can handle this? And then they seem surprised, like, but no, I'm good.
Yeah.
Like, Do you realize
It's in.
everyone's good?
I was going to say it's interesting you bring that up because we had Rich Leonetti at Metrics this past weekend, and he talked about to the players that sometimes he's been over the close to 30 years he's been umpiring. He's been approached by many college coaches about specific catchers and different players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's your travel coach has to say something nice about you
Hmm.
because you're paying them. Your high school coach generally will be as truthful as they can be because it's the reputation of the program. Like if you're a high school coach and you're like, oh, the kid is so mature and stuff like that, and then kid gets to campus, he's an absolute disaster. Well, you've just knocked out that college recruiting any of your kids for the next 10 years. So I think the college coaches, the high school coaches have to be more forthcoming. And then it's like, I tell athletes, I'm like, they're watching you. Like they know you're good. They can see your tape. They can see you're athletic. They're seeing how you respond to failure. How do you talk to your teammates? What routines do you have? How do you talk to your parents? like, um, I talked to one college lacrosse coach and you know, he's like, listen, palms to the sky, not our guy. Like if he's just like, everything is, oh my God, not our guy. Palms to the sky, not
Yeah,
our guy.
yeah,
Like, wow. He's like, I can recruit the top 100 kids in the nation. I don't need that guy. And it's like, oh, okay. And it's business now. So there's a lot of money involved. Now, how did you guys do with transfers at St. Joe's, right?
I mean, it's listen, the portal is always it's like essentially the Wild West.
Yeah.
What we deal with more than anything is not having dormitories and specific education programs like
Hmm.
not I mean not education specifically, but like we don't have a nursing
Degrees.
program. Yeah, different types of degrees. So that's what we deal with more than anything. I think because of the success we've had over the years, I think it's an attractive place to go athletically. But you can't substitute the away from home experience. It is a
Yeah.
commuter school.
Yeah.
So, when we do get a transfer, it is with intent, which is very positive experience because,
Mhm.
you're in your second or third year of college baseball. You know what St. Joe's University is. If you've heard about us, you know that it's a commuter school. We're usually getting guys that want to come here because they want to win a championship and they've heard about the culture of the program, which
Hmm.
is again a huge testament to Tom Caputo and the staff that he's had around him. But it's sometimes it can be slim pickings,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, it really has more to do with the school experience rather than the baseball experience, which
Yeah.
I would say it has major positives because when you get a transfer here, like I said, it is with intent to add to a culture that is already established as a positive culture, a winning culture, and a growth culture. I think a growth and process culture. I think more than anything. So I think it's been a very positive experience for us.
No.
Sean,
Yeah.
one thing that I promised some people that we would talk about, and it didn't come up. I'm kind of surprised it didn't. Um, we were going to cover the yips. Um, for the interest of time, and I'll preface this by we're going to cut something because I don't think it's going to affect your answer. Rather than go through this is my whole experience getting it as a player and doing it as a coach, because we talked about it with the podcast with Vito a little bit. It'll come up at some point, but um, me, your solution or the way that you view it and how the strategies that you give guys to work through that, um, I think is pretty independent of what the specific story or experiences. So yeah, I'd love for you to just chat about that before we.
Yeah, so it's neat because the yips is not baseball specific. You have it in golf with putting. Um, I have a lacrosse player who's dealing with something similar to it, and it's not that you're lacking the ability to do the activity, it's you're blocking the ability. So the first thing that I try to do is to get athletes to hone in on the time that started it all. And most athletes can give you the exact day, exactly what happened. Um, it might be you were turning a double play, your legs got taken out from underneath you, coach started yelling at you for making a bad throw. And from that moment on, your attention every time you went to throw was on the negative things that could happen. So we have to reframe it. And with that reframing, we simplify it. Like, for you to accomplish this skill that you want to do, what's your three most important things? Like for throwing, it's, you know, grip, target, follow through. And just keep that, use those thoughts to replace the thoughts of the negative experience that you had. And it's really a replacement. Most of the time, the yips comes out of a moment where you failed, and now you're fearful of failing again. So we just try to reestablish the good thoughts that we have, the physical thoughts that we can control this. I just had a lacrosse player, you know, certain thing on defense she struggles with. We went right back to when did this happen? And she could tell you the school, the date, the situation, everything that happened that started it. And then she just ruminated. Every time that situation came up, she thought of what could go wrong as opposed to what can I control? And it was, you know, run aggressively, see the field, deliver the pass. And she actually said, complete the pass. And I go, no, we're going to deliver the pass because completing the pass is up to the person catching it. That's out of our control. We're going to deliver the pass. That's it. Um, and she called me up yesterday and she's like, oh, it's so easy now. Like, yeah, you know, when it's usually the yips is we're just blocking because we made a mistake and we are afraid of making it again. Simple as.
That is so simple.
I love it. I
Not
love it.
not to make it easy because it's a um like as I've mentioned, like we've experienced it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's not complicated, and there's this feeling like it's this mythical complex thing. Am I gonna, you know? And it's really just a it's like a mental adversity you're gonna figure out how to
Don't talk about
manage.
it. Don't talk about it.
Right. Yeah. And when you
No,
put it
it's.
that way, where I had this negative experience, right? So for me, without going through the whole story, for me, I went to go throw a ball back to the pitcher,
Mm-hmm.
and the pitcher, um, he wasn't looking, or he was kind of like this, and I threw it, and I was like, oh, and I threw it fine, but now I was aware, like, oh, let me make sure he's paying attention. And then he did it again when I went to go throw, and they would just, and then out of the corner of his eye, he'd see the ball was coming and then catch it, like any of us could do. Um, and then so it put me out like my awareness was peaked. And
Mm-hmm.
then a different one would go, and he thought the best time to wipe sweat out of his eye was as I was throwing him the ball. So when I was doing that, he would go and but he'd catch it still.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm already aware that two different players. And then one time his hand got caught, like it got the lace got snagged on the button of his jersey or something, and he didn't get hurt or anything, but he like almost got hit in the face. So now I don't trust that he's going to catch it, and I'm concerned that I'm going to hurt him. So now I'm focused on something that's out of my control because the ball's already left my hand. So when you talk about, you know, like that's the root of it, I very slowly and with a lot of struggle learned to change my focus to not be on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say that could have saved me a lot of struggle if I had started, instead of learning of ways to go around it and then regaining the confidence to not care, if I just focused on maybe not caring, but just having a different intent, it would have been like, oh, this isn't a career-ending plague. It's just something you're going to work through for a bit.
That's
Yeah, and
hilarious.
like pitchers, it's almost always they hit someone.
Oh, throw MVP.
No,
No, no, like
pitchers.
pitchers on the
Oh,
mound.
I know, but I'm saying like that's throwing
But
BP.
in
It's
like
pitching and
usually in an intra squad, because they hit one of
mm,
their teammates in an intra squad game, and then their attention is on hurting a teammate during the season.
Yeah.
And that now their attention is purely on I can't hurt my teammate. Everybody's going to be mad at me and all of that stuff. And it's like, all right, let's reframe our attention from the negative to what we do control. Yeah, it's such a bizarre thing. It really is. A lot of research papers written on the yips.
to start to wrap this up. Um, you are not you're a weird mix where you're not a big social media person in the sense that you're not posting reels and you're not making this like here are your 5 tips for the yips and it's all whatever. And you're not jumping up from the bleachers and telling everyone wearing wristbands that that they gotta just believe and but you on your Instagram you will post stories once or twice ish a day of different things that you've come across in your own research, looking at different sports because you work with athletes across many different disciplines. And you'll post things here and there that every time I go to click on uh, your story, it's something. There's baseball in there, but it's something from somewhere else that's applicable, and it's like, I like that. Um, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. I was going to ask what the handle is, and so people know who you are and all that.
I couldn't even tell you the handle. You'll have to just
Okay,
it's
I'll write it in
Sean
the
O'Neill
type.
something. Um, it's that idea of it's part of my life. So if I see something that resonates with me, it's like, oh, cool. I'm gonna post that. There there are parents that have asked me to work with their kids, but their kids are hesitant because it's weird and all this stuff. So a lot of times I'm posting those things for those kids who I don't work with. For the kids that follow me, they've seen me at metrics or they've seen me at prime infield or I've been at their school and it's there for them. It's kind of the, you know, I know this can help and if it can help someone, great, awesome. Like I said, put myself out of business. Go social media.
Ah, well, excellent. So, and one more thing to clarify, you're from Long Island in New York, but
Yep.
the people that you work with are all over the place.
Yeah. Um, I actually have more clients outside of Long Island than I do on Long Island. And I think that's just because of the slow nature of mental performance to kind of grasp on. Um, but like I have a call after this with an athlete in South Carolina. Um, Tonight I'll have a call with an athlete in Oregon. And thank goodness for Zoom because it allows athletes from all over the place to get this information. Um, I'd like if I could, you know, easier commute and not have to worry about time zones, but it comes along. I've always felt
because this is a side business for me that I want it to grow organically. I don't want it to become a corporate model for me. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's cool. Like I get to use skills that enhance my teaching skills as well. So with doing it in a different environment. So that's always fun.
Yeah, I've certainly started throwing a bunch of the guys I've worked with towards you, and
Thank
the
you.
ones that have the ones that have initiated or have been willing to have an initial conversation and try it have all stayed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we should wrap this up. We'll have you on again at some point, maybe
Oh, no problem.
towards. I think moving forward, it'd be good to talk during like influential time periods of the year.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
approaching playoffs, transitioning into summer ball, getting ready for the college season or a new year of high school, and like those types of times. Because you make it a point of yours with the athletes you work with as they're approaching a new phase in their careers to like get ahead of it.
Hmm.
So I think that'd be cool to have a little bit more specific conversations as we move forward. But
Teach them how to whoop.
appreciate you from jumping on.
Thank you. This is good fun.
I mean, I talk to you often, so it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, man, it was really nice having you on. I mean, we had a small conversation.
Dropping a net.
We had a small conversation over at Metrics, right?
Hmm.
Sorry. And
There's a
yeah,
time
sorry.
delay.
Yeah, sorry, there's a little time delay there. But we had a small conversation at Metrics, and Kyle has spoken about you pretty extensively, and I appreciate the impact and the work that you do, because as a coach and as a player even, the most important thing for me has always been my teammates, and as a coach, my players. So to know that these athletes are getting this kind of care and attention in these areas means the world, and again makes me feel super optimistic for the future of athletics and specifically for the future of baseball. So I appreciate the work you do, and selfishly, I love to get to learn from people like yourself. So thank you very much.